At first, no one noticed. Tiberius still walked the gardens, still rested in the shadows of the apostolic palace, still moved with that quiet grace that had become his holy signature since Pope Francis passed. But then the change began. He stopped barking, stopped eating, stopped following the steps of Pope Leo XIV through the marble corridors. He would lie in one spot for hours, unblinking, unmoving, as if waiting for something the world could no longer give him. At first, they thought it was age. He was, after all, getting older. But there was something deeper in his silence. Something mournful. Something sacred. One morning, the nuns who cared for him brought his favorite bread, softened in warm milk, just as Francis once did. Tiberius turned away. No growl. No whimper. Just a quiet refusal. One of the sisters wept quietly in the garden. "He's not sick," she said. "He's remembering." And so the Vatican began to worry. Not just for a dog, but for a soul who had never needed to speak to be understood. The concern spread quietly like candlelight through a cloister. In the kitchens, in the archives, along the mosaic halls, people whispered not about politics or protocol, but about a dog who would no longer eat. One of the Swiss guards was overheard saying, "It's like his spirit is somewhere else." The gardeners spoke in hushed tones, "He lies in the same place for hours, like he's guarding something we can't see." The whispers reached the Pope. Leo XIV was briefed during a morning report. He asked no questions at first. He simply stood from the table and walked out without his entourage. Later that day, he was seen sitting beside Tiberius, on the floor, silent, still. Just sitting. They stayed there for nearly an hour. No one disturbed them. And when Leo XIV returned to his private chapel, he said only one sentence to his secretary: "He's grieving in ways we can't yet understand." The Vatican had seen miracles, had heard confessions of saints and scandals alike. But never had it been held still by the mystery of an animal's grief. And so the whispers grew. Because everyone could feel it, something sacred was unfolding. And no one wanted to miss what it was trying to say. By the third day, Tiberius chose a single spot. Just off the southern corridor near the Vatican Library, there was a small, ivy-shaded door, old and used. And there, in front of that door, he lay down. And would not move. He didn't bark. He didn't sleep. He simply watched. Guards tried gently to nudge him. Nuns offered fresh food. Even Pope Leo XIV came to sit beside him again. But nothing worked. Every time he was moved or coaxed away, he returned, faithfully, silently, to that same place. One Swiss guard finally whispered to a colleague, "It's like he's guarding a tomb." But there was no tomb there. No grave. No plaque. Just an old door. Forgotten by most. Until one elderly custodian paused. He stared at the door and his eyes widened. "That's the chapel," he said. "The one Pope Francis used when he didn't want anyone to hear him pray. A hidden room. A forgotten sanctuary. A private space of sacred intimacy, now remembered not by humans but by a dog." And suddenly, the silence of Tiberius made sense. He wasn't lost. He had found his way back. It took hours to find the key. The chapel had not been used since Francis' death. It wasn't marked on official tours. It wasn't part of the papal residence. It was his private refuge, a place where he would kneel alone at dawn, where he once wept over the Syrian war, and where he often sat in silence beside Tiberius, who never barked, never begged, just stayed. Two cardinals and Pope Leo XIV stood in front of the door. Tiberius lay between them and the entrance, unmoving. "He's protecting it," whispered Cardinal Parolin. "Or waiting." With the gentlest voice he could summon, Leo XIV knelt beside him. "Tiberius," he said softly, "may I enter?" The dog looked up. His eyes were heavy but still bright. He stood slowly. His tail did not wag. He stepped aside. The Pope opened the door. The hinges groaned softly. Light from the corridor spilled in. The room was just as Francis had left it. Simple. Stone. Quiet. One candle on the altar, long melted to its base. A wooden cross above. And on the bench where Francis used to kneel, a folded cloth, gray with time, stained with something that looked like tears. Tiberius walked in first, and curled up beneath the bench, like he had done every time Francis prayed. The candle was long dead, but the room was full of light. Not the kind that comes from windows or chandeliers, but the light of memory, thick and sacred. Pope Leo XVI stepped into the chapel slowly. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of footsteps remembered, prayers absorbed by stone, and tears never spoken aloud. And there, beneath the old prayer bench, Tiberius curled in complete stillness. The Pope knelt beside him. He reached gently for the folded cloth, stiff with time, edges frayed. It wasn't part of Francis' vestments. It was a simple handkerchief. He unfolded it slowly. And there, stitched in faded thread, Per Maria Servus Christi. Through Mary, servant of Christ. Beneath it, faint, was the unmistakable scent of the man who once knelt in that very spot night after night. Francis. Tiberius let out a small whimper, not from pain but from recognition. He had been following that scent. That memory. That presence. And now he had found it. Leo XIV did not cry like a pontiff. He cried like a friend who had just understood the last message of the one he lost. He wasn't looking for a place, he whispered. He was looking for the last piece of him. Word spread quickly. Not through press briefings or official channels, but through whispers, reverent and breathless. They found him. He was in the chapel. With a handkerchief that still smelled of Francis. Monks left their cells. Nuns paused their rosaries. Even hardened diplomats in the Secretariat of State stood frozen in the halls, unsure whether to speak or kneel. The Pope did not summon them. But they came anyway. And one by one they stood at the edge of that small chapel door, not to marvel at relics but to witness devotion. Tiberius remained still. The cloth remained in place. The room was no longer forgotten. It had become, in the language of every faith tradition, holy ground. Leo XIV did not give a speech. He simply placed his hand on Tiberius' back and looked up at the quiet faces gathered at the threshold. He remembered what we forgot, he said. Where the prayers were. Where the tears were. Where the scent of love remained. No one moved. No one wanted to. Because sometimes the most profound homily is not delivered from the pulpit, but spoken in silence, in presence. They brought a cushion. They brought water. But Tiberius would not move. He didn't need comfort. He had already found what he had searched for since April 21st. Not food. Not play. Not rest. But a scent. A memory. A presence. The cloth beneath the bench, left behind by Pope Francis, still held the essence of countless whispered prayers, of silent tears wiped away during long nights of pleading. Tiberius had not forgotten. He had followed that invisible trail. He had known something none of them had guessed. The place where love last breathed is where love still lingers. The Vatican, usually a place of grandeur, had been humbled by a dog's memory. Some cried. Some knelt. Some just stood with hands over their mouths, unable to believe they had missed what a creature without words had found with only his heart. Leo XVI stood in the doorway. This, he said, is the church. Not gold. Not garments. But faith that refuses to forget, even when the world moves on. That night, Tiberius slept beneath the bench. Not out of sorrow, but in peace. The cloth remained. So did the silence. And in that stillness, something eternal stirred. The next morning, Pope Leo XVI walked into the chapel alone. He didn't speak. He didn't kneel. He just stood and understood. This was not about grief anymore. This was about love that refused to fade. Love that remembered where the last breath fell. Love that followed even when it wasn't called. Love that waited, not for recognition, but for presence. In a world obsessed with moving on, Tiberius had taught the church how to stay. Not just in place, but in love. In fidelity. In sacred memory. Leo bent down and whispered, "You didn't forget him. And now, we will never forget you." And so the story did not end with death. It became liturgy. Not in words, but in a gesture that would be passed down for generations, a dog. A cloth. A place no one thought sacred until one creature remembered where love had last knelt. Because sometimes, what love remembers becomes the church's greatest inheritance.